Welcome to the John Campea Podcast, episode 18 for Monday, April the 25th, 2016. This episode of the John Campea Podcast is sponsored by geekfeed.com. Stuff your geek hole. Hey guys, and thanks for joining me on this episode of the John Campea Podcast. We're going to talk about this vicious, poisonous DC versus Marvel environment and all the damage it's doing to the entire genre. We're going to talk about the Game of Thrones premiere, Robert Downey Jr. joins SpiderMan, no more Inhumans movie, and a whole lot more. So sit back, relax. The John Campea Podcast starts right now. Well, hey there, guys. Happy Monday, and welcome to the John Campea Podcast. My first one in a week. It's been a week. Well, last week was a very odd week. Last week was the annual NAB conference. The National Association of Broadcasters is an annual convention that's held in Las Vegas, where they show off all the new video gear, audio gear, production, streaming environments, all that kind of stuff. It's a big, big, huge show. And I know myself and Dennis, we try to go every year when we can. And so I slipped out to Vegas for a few days, had a very good time out there. And a lot of stuff has been going on. A lot of stuff has been going on. And a few big things I want to talk about here on today's show. And trust me, we're going to get to this whole, the new, the Founder trailer that came out, the new XMen trailer dropped this morning, whole bunch of stuff there. But there's a huge issue that I really want to address here on the podcast. And I've kind of touched on this before, but we're seeing really the ramifications and the damage of this going on a lot. And I want to talk here a little bit about, because if any of you guys have been following what's been going on the last few days, like with death threats being made and all that kind of crap, I really wanted to take a little bit of time today and talk about this, okay? The DC versus Marvel not DC the company and Marvel the company. No. I'm talking about the DC hyper idiotic fanboys versus the Marvel hyper idiotic fanboys. Now, let me be very clear here. I am a DC fanboy and I am a Marvel fanboy, but I'm not a zealot. I'm not a corporate slave to either. And it's always boggled my mind how anybody would become a corporate slave to either of them. Anything by DC is the most magnificent thing ever, and if you like Marvel, then you're stupid pieces of shit, and blah, blah, or vice versa, because we've seen it go the other way too, haven't we? We've seen lots of Marvel fanboys act that way. See, I'm totally cool. I've always said this. I'm totally cool with somebody liking one thing over the other. Hey, you prefer all the DC movies over the Marvel movies. That's cool. Nothing wrong with that. Oh, hey, you really love the Marvel movies and the DC movies haven't worked for you. That's totally cool too. It's when you get into this religious zealot mindset that I predetermine anything by Marvel is garbage, or I predetermine anything by DC is garbage, or I predetermine everything by Marvel is awesome, or you predetermine that everything by DC is awesome. When you get into this religious zealot kind of mentality, you are no longer a fan. You're a corporate slave. You are a slave. You've just picked which corporation you're going to be a slave to. Congratulations. You have abandoned all your free will. You're so weak that you've wrapped your entire personal identity up in being a slave to one of those corporations. Again, nothing wrong with preferring one over the other. Nothing wrong even saying, hey, I happen to like everything by this one and I happen to not like anything by the other. That's fine. That's cool. Nothing wrong with that. That's awesome. There are DC movies I love and hate. There are Marvel movies I love and hate. That's totally cool. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But that's not what we're talking about either. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you know the type of person we're talking about. We're talking about this zealotous, brain-dead, fanboy zealot war that goes on. And, I've been trying to warn people about that type of mentality for a long time. For years, you've heard me talking about this on Movie Talk. You've heard me talking about this on old podcasts. You've heard me talking about this in special videos forever. That this zealot, brain-dead, moronic, corporate slave mentality is not just childish. All right? It's not just childish. I've warned that it is actually dangerous. and that ultimately you're going to hurt the movie fan community as a whole. You're doing damage. That this sort of mentality will do damage and hurt the genre as a whole. I've been saying that for a long time. And now, this past week, we've seen some practical ramifications of that mentality, of this vicious, poisonous environment that the fanatical, zealot Marvel fanboys and the fanatical, zealot DC fanboys, we're starting to see now the actual, it's no longer just theoretical, folks. We're now starting to see the actual practical damage that these brain-dead morons are starting to cause the genre and the film fan community as a whole. We're starting to see this kind of damage. Look, when you get people, I mean, I could pull up 100 tweets that I get from both zealot Marvel fanboys who accuse me of being in Warner Brothers' pocket and who accuse me of being a blind DC fanboy because I was talking so big about Batman versus Superman and that I liked it even though other critics didn't, and that going into this year, I said it was my number one anticipated movie 2016. I could show you all these tweets from a bunch of these Marvel zealot idiot fanboys who sent that. And now I can show you a bunch of tweets from the DC zealot, idiot fanboys, Grace Randolph being one of them, coming out and accusing me of being in Marvel's pocket, because I said I like Civil War more than Batman versus Superman. I'm clearly a Marvel fanboy and blah, blah, blah. You see, what the damage that this type of environment does. And listen, it's not too late. If you're one of these people, it's not too late to look in the mirror and say, yeah, maybe I need to calm down a little bit. Maybe I need to calm down a little bit. Because if you're one of these people, you have the opportunity now to change the environment. Because here's what we see happening now. This Marvel zealot fanboyism versus DC DC zealot fanboyism, we're starting to see it become just flat out toxic and dangerous. On one hand, now you've got this, YouTube critic, Grace Randolph, who, by the way, was an employee of Marvel at one point and very publicly got fired. And now she wants to talk about how other people are biased. Okay, whatever. But this is just an example. I'm actually not trying to rehash the whole issue here with Grace Randolph, but this is just an example, okay? And there are going to be more examples I'm going to give. But now we've got feeding this toxic environment people like Grace Randolph, who are creating this environment where they start throwing out these ridiculous conspiracy theories. Oh, that now there are critics who are biased against DC, and there's Marvel is paying them off, and she's put out tweets to suggest even I am somehow on the take with Marvel because of this, that, or the other thing. So you got people like this now feeding this environment. What does that do to the environment? When you get people like Grace Randolph, a former Marvel employee who was fired by Marvel and now talking all types of crap about anybody that likes Marvel. Gee, I wonder who's the biased one here. Anyway, when you get people like that feeding this toxic environment, it exasperates the situation. It makes it even worse. It takes it even to a higher fevered pitch. And then what happens is you get other people who feed on that, and then they take it to the next level. And then they take it to the next level. Look, I'm in the online film business. That means the moment you put out any type of an opinion, and my job and lots of people's jobs are about giving our opinions. That's what we do. And you have to be ready that when you give your opinion, there's going to be people out there who don't like your opinion. Actually, if there's not people out there who don't like your opinion, you're doing something wrong. Because if everybody agrees with your opinion, then there's probably something wrong with that situation. Anyway, but you got to be prepared that people will disagree, and that's fine and that's cool. But I mean, the types of ignorance that this type of an environment creates is on a whole different level. I mean, I've had debates online with people about, hey, should Hurt Locker have won Best Picture? Hey, should Avatar have been nominated for this? Hey, was was Argo that really good of a film? And there'd be some very passionate debates online, but they never usually cross a certain line. It's not until you start talking about this Marvel versus DC war. And again, it's not Marvel and it's not DC. It's the zealot brain-dead corporate DC slaves versus the zealot brain-dead corporate Marvel slaves that are doing this. It's not until you get into this war that you see the real worst of humanity come out in a lot of the tweets and responses I get. Like, seriously, I have never read more homophobic, racist, belligerent, hate-filled stuff than stuff I get from zealot Marvel fanboys when I start talking good things about Batman versus Superman, or that I get from the zealot brain-dead DC fanboys when I start talking really positive about a Marvel film, about Captain America, whatever, right? Now, forgive my language that you're about to hear, but this is the example of what you get. There are certain people who will, tweet me stuff. It doesn't bother me, but it's just representative of these are the types of people. Folks, if you're a part of this war, these are the people that represent you. All right. They write stuff like, where is it? Oh yeah. Homo trash cocksucker fucker, Marvel fanboy, fuck you, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's the intelligence level of people involved in this type of a scenario, in this type of war. So we see it manifesting with online personalities like the ones I've mentioned coming out and actually feeding into it and saying, oh, there's conspiracies and there's payoffs that feed into more. We got this rabid two sides of this fanatical argument that just escalated more and more and more. And what has happened now is that this week, a girl that does some work for me, Clark Wolf, who is a great online commentator. Remember, it's not what makes somebody a great online commentator is not whether you agree or disagree with them. That's irrelevant. It's about how well do they express and communicate their thoughts whenever. And I think Clark Wolf is just one of the best. I think she's great. And so she gets this comment said at her this week that not basically, it flat out, straight up, explicitly threatened her life. That because she didn't like Man of Steel, a movie that I love, by the way, because she didn't love Man of Steel, this guy wrote, if I see you walking the streets in the town you live in, I'm going to straight up shoot you, or I'm going to murder you. And then they put a little picture of a girl's head with a gun up to it. Now, first of all, there are some morons out there who think that's funny. And you're a moron if you think that. That's not funny. But then there are people out there who goes, oh, well, that's terrible. Like people who are in part of this zealot, fanatical, brain-dead corporate slave war will go, well, that's just terrible. Yeah, but here's the thing. A few weeks ago, President Obama came out and said something that I thought was really interesting. And I don't mean to get political here. I'm just saying, here's one political leader who said something that I thought was interesting that's applicable to this situation, okay? Because, there was a lot of people in the Republican Party that are wondering, how on earth are we allowing Donald Trump? That's not my words. This is just the controversy that's going on, okay? I'm not giving a political opinion here. I'm just telling you the situation, all right? So there were a bunch of people in the Republican Party kind of lamenting the fact that their party is at a place that a guy like Donald Trump might end up being their presidential nominee. And because of that's going on, President Obama at this one event, you guys probably remember this, said, I'm paraphrasing Obama here now, but Obama said, how are you surprised? He said, for years, you've been fostering an environment of this kind of rhetoric. Now, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with Obama. I'm just saying the principle of what he's saying here applies to our situation here. It says, for years, you've fostered an environment of this type of rhetoric and hate speech and all this kind of stuff. How are you surprised now that a guy like Donald Trump, who kind of, this is, again, Obama's words, who embodies what it is you've been doing for the last few years, now rises up through your ranks and is probably going to be your nominee? How are you surprised? And the reason I think that's interesting here is because that is pretty much the situation we have now. Because, we talk online now about how now we got people getting death threats. And by the way, this isn't the first time this has happened. Right now we get some zealot, ignorant DC fanboy issuing death threats. But not that long ago, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine in the online film critical world, some of you might remember this, was the first person to give Avengers a negative review on Rotten Tomatoes. She was the first person to give a rotten review, a bad review to the Avengers. Now, I think the Avengers is the greatest comic book movie of all time, but and she ended up getting death threats too over this. I mean, how ridiculous is that? So anyway, here we are now in this situation. And what I would say to all these people who are involved in this brain-dead, fanatical corporate slave war between DC zealots and Marvel zealots is that, folks, don't act all surprised. Don't act all innocent and surprised when something as horrific and horrible as a young lady getting death threats from some dude happens. Because, folks, you have been fostering this type of an environment. You have been incubating this type of an environment to which the natural outcome is crap like this. Like, I'm sorry, but when you get online and you start amping up the rhetoric and you start amping up fucking faggots, DC cocksuckers, blah, 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 like all this visceral, poisonous, terrible stuff, and it escalates and it escalates and it escalates, and you keep fostering that and you keep incubating that, and you just relish and you live and you roll around like pigs in muck. And you roll around like these swine in this filth, and you foster that environment. Don't act all surprised when crap like this happens. When a young woman gets threatened for her life because she didn't like a movie that you liked, because she didn't like a movie that falls within your zealot church of fanaticism. Don't be surprised that this happens. I have been telling you guys for years, this type of mentality is dangerous. So when you get these online fanboys who write crap like this, when you get a Grace Randolph who starts peppering things like, oh, there's anti-DC agendas and there's payoffs, and when you get that type of sick thinking, when you get that type of fanaticism and it's given a place to foster and incubate and grow, this is the type of crap we get. And guess what? This isn't even the worst of it. It's going to get worse. Because we tolerate this type of idiocracy. It's just unacceptable. And don't just think it ends with one girl getting some death threat either. There are lots of people get comments. And guess what? I've said this before. Ultimately, this will also hurt the genre as a whole. Like, after all the crap with Grace Randolph and after all the crap with the death threats, and by the way, there's no one person responsible for this. Let me be very clear about that. There is no one person responsible for this. If you're somebody and you jumped on a chat board once and you started spewing all that poison out, it is not specifically your fault that somebody got a death threat. I'm not suggesting in the least that it's Grace Randolph's fault that the death threat. I'm not specifically saying it's this person's fault. No, it doesn't. But what happens is when you get the collective group that over years just act this way, it is nobody's individual fault. But you have to understand and accept the fact that collectively, you have fostered an environment where these types of attitudes grow out of. And these types of actions grow out of. And in that respect, there's a whole lot of people who deserve a monochrome of responsibility for this. It's not any one person's fault. It's not this person's fault. It's not that person's fault. It's a collective thing. Not even just a collection of people, but a collection of time. This has been going on for a long time. There's lots of us that deserve at least a little monochrome of responsibility, and it's up to everybody involved in this to take some responsibility and say, what can I do to change this? How can we change the dialogue? How can we change this environment? Because guess what, folks? I mean, despite tiny, tiny little pockets here, the debate between Star Trek and Star Wars has gone on for decades. But guess what? For the vast majority of it, it's just really good nature, poke and jab, back and forth jabs. Certainly people prefer one over the other, but never has it gotten to this type of visceral poison that we see now. More people need to understand that they are damaging the genre as a whole. That means whichever corporate slave you are, you're damaging your corporate master by this too. Because it was after the Grace Randolph stuff and this death threat stuff that I started getting people sending me messages who aren't big into comic book films. It's like, oh, only pathetic losers watch comic book movies now. Why are they saying that? Why are people sending me comments like that? Because they see these uneducated, driveling idiots sending out death threats, or they get on a chat board. Say they get on a Movie Talk Live chat board, and half of what they see are these little 12-year-old morons writing, "You're a fucking cocksucker if you watch Marvel," and blah, blah. Like, they see that, and so what does that do to people who are outside of the core fan community of the comic book genre? What does it do? If I start getting comments from people and messages from people like this going, why would I want to get into Marvel films? Why would I want to get into DC films when it's just a bunch of little pathetic losers who talk like this are the fans of that? I don't want to be one of those. I'm not going to watch these movies. I'm not going to be getting into these movies. You start this whole little spatty sniveling war is turning other people off the genre. And you might be stupid enough to think, oh, well, it doesn't matter because the genre is so big that it doesn't matter if we continue to attract in new audiences and get healthy viewers involved in the fan communities. It doesn't matter. Yeah, tell that to MySpace. Tell that to MySpace. Oh, it doesn't matter. We're the biggest genre right now, so it doesn't matter. It's going to be the biggest forever. Yeah, tell that to MySpace. Because unless you continue to foster new fans and continue to bring in new people into the fan community and stuff like that, your long term is that you're dead. And right now, these little sniveling idiots, these little corporate slaves, and if you're one of them, listen, hope is not lost yet. There's still a chance to redeem this, okay? If you're one of these people, stop what you're doing for a second, understanding not only am I not helping anybody, that my comments aren't doing any good and I'm not changing anybody's mind anyway, but the way I'm conducting myself, I'm actually turning people off the films that I love. Like when I get into a chat board and, and spout off all this homophobic, racist, hate-filled dialogue and speech, when I get on that, do I think that there's some neutral person reading it and thinking, oh, that guy makes a good point. I think I'm going to start watching DC movies. No. You're turning people off the films that you represent or that you'd like to think you represent. You are hurting the industry as a whole. You are hurting the fan community as a whole. You are nothing but a cancerous little blob that's just killing everything around it that you claim to love and support. You're actually hurting it. I still think the most brilliant comment about this entire situation has come from Superman himself, Henry Cavill. And I wish more people would listen to what Henry had to say about this. But a couple weeks ago, he was asked about the DC Marvel fan, the war and stuff like that. And Henry, being the incredibly eloquent, smart dude that he is, this is what Superman had to say. Talking about the war between Marvel films and DC films. Henry Cavill gets it. This is what Henry Cavill said. They're such different entities, which is great, which is why I like Marvel movies as well. And they're not really competition at all because they're so different, so different. And when Marvel does well, I'm happy. So that means superhero films are doing well. And that means DC will do well. Listen again to what listen to how much common frickin' sense Henry Cavill is making here, okay? Okay, listen again to how smart Superman is. Listen to what Henry Cavill says. talking about the war between Marvel and DC. They're such different entities, which is great, which is why I like Marvel movies as well. And they're not really competition at all because they're so different. And when Marvel does well, I'm happy because that means superheroes are doing well, and that means DC will do well too. Folks, listen to what Superman is saying. Listen to what Henry Cavill is saying, because he is 100% bang on the money. Because listen, folks, all you Marvel, crazy fanboys, all right? Those of you who think that Batman vs. Superman making $850 million worldwide is somehow a giant failure. It's not as much as it should have made. No, not at all. But you're clinically insane if you call $850 million worldwide some kind of failure. But anyway, if you're sitting there celebrating that, yay, Batman vs. Superman didn't do as well as it should have. If you're sitting there and you're a Marvel, acolyte going, yay, Batman vs. Superman, quote unquote, failed. Yay, a bunch of fans didn't like it. Yay, a bunch of critics didn't like it. Then you're stupid. Because listen to what Henry Cavill is saying, because what Henry Cavill said is 100% right. And I have been saying this for a long time. The last line of what he says, I'm happy because if Marvel is doing well, that means the superhero genre is doing well. And DC, Henry Cavill understands, is a part of the superhero genre. So the better the superhero genre does, the better it is for us. And he's 100% right. Because here's the thing, for those Marvel acolytes who are quote unquote celebrating the quote unquote failure of Batman versus Superman, guess what? That hurts if you're right. And I don't think you're right. I think $850 million is a great result. I like Batman versus Superman. But granted, it didn't do as well as it should. And granted, a lot of critics didn't like it. And granted, a lot of fans didn't like it. Okay, that's fair. But no matter how much money now Captain America Civil War makes, no matter how much, this is the truth. It would have made more if Batman vs. Superman did better. If Batman vs. Superman made like 1.3 billion, if like 80% of the critics liked it, and if, the fans gave it a cinema score of like an A or an A minus or an A or an A plus or whatever, if people had liked Batman vs. Superman more, that would have been better for Captain America Civil War. Because what would have happened? Just like Henry Cavill said, what would have happened? A bunch of people go to the movie theater. It's like, wow, we loved Batman versus Superman. I had such a great time watching that movie. And then what? Like 2 months later, we got another massive superhero film of heroes fighting each other over different ideologies. Awesome. I had a great time the last time I went to it and spent my money at the theater. I'm going to go back again. That's what happens. That's what Henry Cavill means by, hey, listen, when Marvel does well, that's good for the genre. And when the genre does well, DC being part of the genre, that's good for us too. Because I've said before, and people called me crazy. I said, look, there is nobody out there in the world hoping for Batman. This is before Batman vs. Superman came out. I said, there's nobody in the world who is cheering for Batman vs. Superman to do really well more than Kevin Feige. There is nobody out there who is cheering for Batman vs. Superman to do great business more than Kevin Feige. I guarantee you Kevin Feige was the biggest cheerleader for Batman vs. Superman to do great critically, to do great with the fans, to do great financially. Because, like Henry Cavill said, if that happened with that DC movie, that means the whole genre gets lifted up, and that creates an environment in which Captain America Civil War comes out and will do even better business than it would have done. To quote Obi-Wan Kenobi, in that horrible movie, The Phantom Menace, there's a symbiotic relationship between DC and Marvel on the screen because they're all part of the superhero genre. What's good for one is good for the other. What is bad for one will be bad for the other. And a healthy, thriving genre, look, if you're a Marvel fan, a healthy, thriving comic book genre environment is good for your Marvel movies. If you're a DC fan, a healthy, thriving comic book movie genre that Marvel contributes to, that ultimately is good for DC. And ultimately, if everybody's doing great, that brings in more fans. That brings in more of the neutral to the comic book genre movie fans into the genre, and that's good for everybody. But again, and I've been going off on this topic for a long time now, what it comes down to is this, is that for years now, the zealots on both sides of this argument have fostered and incubated and created this toxic environment that you no longer get to act surprised when you create this cesspool and then act all shocked when something terrible comes out of the cesspool. So when we get people making death threats, when we get, young ladies getting their lives threatened, told they're going to be shot walking down the street in their town, if you're part of that toxic environment and you're part of the group contributing to this toxic, poisonous atmosphere with this fanatical DC versus Marvel fanboyism, don't you dare act all innocent, and don't you dare act all shocked and go, oh, I had nothing to do with that. I ain't saying it's your fault specifically, but don't you dare act like you had nothing to do with it. Because if you contribute to that toxic, poisonous environment, then there's at least a part of the responsibility that everybody has to accept and everybody has to share. That's just the reality of it. So don't pretend like you had nothing to do with it, because you did have something. It's not your fault specifically. It's not that person's fault specifically. There's no one person other than the brain dead moron, who I hope they find him soon, who wrote that thing. That it's that guy's fault specifically. But if you're a contributor to that toxic environment, don't pretend like you had nothing to do with it as well, because you did. And it's time that we start changing the dialogue. It's time that we started changing that toxic environment and get back just to being movie fans. Argue and debate why certain movies are crap and certain movies are great, but keep it on a certain level. Like, you've heard me talk about, like, there's no bigger hater on the Star Wars prequels than me, right? But I always end, every time I talk about why I hate the prequels, you always hear me end every one of those things. It's like, look, that's not me saying you shouldn't like them. If you like those movies, then I celebrate that. I think that's awesome if you got something out of them and you like them. For me, they didn't work because of reasons A, B, C, D, E, and F all the way through double and triple Z. But that's just me. But we need to get this whole fanatical, zealot, corporate slave mentality debate back to that level, where we can talk about why we love this and why we hated that. But hey, there's nothing wrong with you if you love the thing I hated or if you hated the thing I loved. We got to get back to that if we're going to make this whole fan community a better place to be. All right. Well, enough of that. Let's move on now to some other stuff. Game of Thrones last night returned. Now, look, I'm not the biggest Game of Thrones fan in the world, but I certainly enjoy the show. And I like certain seasons more than most. I will admit I was a little frustrated with last season. Other than like the last 2 episodes, which just went gangbusters, I felt like the first 8 episodes of the season was just, and maybe it's not fair to say, but I felt like it was just a lot of filler. And I also think it's fair to say that the undisputed most popular character on that show is Tyrion Lannister, right? It's Peter Dinklage. And I felt like, and maybe this isn't fair, but I'm just saying it feels like I got like 5 or 10, 15 minutes of Tyrion Lannister in total over the entire season. And so I don't know, maybe there's too much going on. Anyway, I still watch the season. I still kind of like the season, but I was a little bit frustrated with the season. But the last 2 episodes were great. And so last night, me and a bunch of people got together at the Collider offices, which are now my offices as well. We got together at the office to watch the premiere. There's probably about 15 or 20 of us that watch the season premiere of the new Game of Thrones. And we watched the last 2 episodes of last season and then watched the new episode of this season. I gotta say, for a season premiere, I feel like it did just about everything right. I honestly watch it as was it the best episode? No, but it's a season premiere. Your season premiere kind of sets the table now for the season. And I felt like this was a great first episode of the new season. And that, oh my gosh, that final scene with the Red Woman, I thought that was really well played. I like the fact that if you haven't watched the season premiere yet, this will be a little bit of a spoiler for you, but not too much. But I like how the very first shot of the new season is Jon Snow laying in the, snow. That's the very first shot of the season. I love that we get out, we see what's going on with Khaleesi. We see the whole thing with the new cows and all. They just did a lot of things right, I felt. And it did what I think a season premiere should do, which is set the table for the season, get you primed and whet your appetite for the upcoming season. And for me personally, and to be honest, I haven't looked around at other reviews online, so I don't know if people generally were happy or unhappy with the episode. I just know that I was happy with it. As somebody who is a Game of Thrones fan, but not a super fan, I watched and thought, yeah, this was top notch. This was a really good first episode of the season, so Game of Thrones off to a good start. All right, let's go on to my third topic of the day, because I'm already running long. Sorry about that, guys. My third topic of the day, I got to talk about this. This came out last week and was a little bit of a surprise, I'll be honest. Robert Downey Jr. confirmed that he will be making an appearance. How big or how small, we don't know, but Robert Downey Jr. will be making an appearance in the new Sony SpiderMan Homecoming, coming out next year. So, first of all, I'm going to talk about why it's a bit of a surprise to me, and then I'm going to talk about why it really shouldn't have been a surprise to me. It was a bit of a surprise to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, when Sony and Marvel made their deal, the press releases made it sound like lesser known Marvel characters that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe aren't either, they haven't been introduced yet or aren't getting a lot of play. When they made the announcement, it kind of sounded to me like they'd be taking those characters, for lack of a better term, say B-level characters, and maybe have some B-level Marvel characters show up and make appearances in a standalone Spider-Man film. It didn't sound like we were going to get a Captain America or a Thor or an Iron Man pop up in the Sony Spider-Man standalone film. It just didn't sound like it. I also was a little bit surprised because at the time when they made the announcement, going back to last April, there was still a little bit of a question about, what is Robert Downey Jr.'s contractual obligations to Marvel now? Because remember, that was a big deal for a time. So because of that. So those are a couple reasons why I was surprised when I heard the announcement that Robert Downey Jr. had confirmed that he will be in the new Sony standalone Spider-Man film. But here's why I shouldn't be surprised. Even though I was surprised, I shouldn't be surprised. Number one, addressing the fact that at the time when Sony and Marvel made their announcement last year, the contractual situation of Robert Downey Jr. was a little bit in question. But today, that's different. It's clear that Robert Downey Jr. and Marvel came to a big agreement. Because now Robert Downey Jr. is like popping up in everything. And from the sounds of it, it doesn't sound like we should count out Iron Man anytime soon. It sounds like Robert Downey Jr. is going to be in like every Marvel film from now until whenever. So the contractual situation between Robert Downey Jr. and Marvel is a completely different situation now than it was just a year ago. So for that reason, I shouldn't be surprised by this announcement. But the other reason I shouldn't be surprised by this announcement is that by putting in an A-list, and by A-list in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I mean a Captain America, an Iron Man, a Thor, okay? By putting in an A-list character, like an Iron Man, like Tony Stark, what you've done now is insulated this new Spider-Man movie from being just another reboot of the Spider-Man franchise. Because remember, we've had a couple of Spider-Man franchises already. Both of the franchises had some incredibly strong films, and both of them had their weak offerings as well. But we've had two incarnations of the Spider-Man franchise already. So Sony is sitting there and thinking, Sony and Marvel together are sitting there and thinking, what can make this different? What can we do for launching this brand new Spider-Man franchise that it won't just look like just another Spider-Man franchise. How do we differentiate this new Spider-Man franchise from the previous two Spider-Man franchises we've already had? Well, you know what the first Spider-Man and the second Spider-Man never had in them? Iron Man. Iron Man wasn't in either of those two. And think about it. All of the top grossing Marvel films, like I'm a Captain America guy. I'm totally Captain America guy. But when you look at the top grossing Marvel cinematic films, they all seem to have Iron Man in them. Whether it's Iron Man 3, and some people didn't even like Iron Man 3, but it did gangbusters at the box office. Captain America Civil War is going to be a huge, massive hit. Avengers Age of Ultron, like whatever you think about Avengers Age of Ultron, it was a huge, massive hit. You've got Infinity Wars 1 and 2 coming. It's just Iron Man being in a Marvel cinematic film has, I'm not saying there's a cause and effect, but I'm just saying there's no denying those films tend to do a little bit better than the other Marvel films. The fact that now you can take an A-list character from the Marvel Cinematic Universe like an Iron Man, being played by Robert Downey Jr., put him in Spider-Man. Now, this is a totally different Spider-Man franchise than we have ever had before. So while I admit I was surprised, not like fall over on the floor surprised, but I was surprised to hear that Robert Downey Jr. was confirmed to be in Spider-Man. Upon reflection, I really shouldn't have been all that surprised because it makes sense. It does make sense, both from a financial point of view, being that Robert Downey Jr. appearing in Marvel films means those Marvel films do better than other Marvel films, and also from a fan perception point of view. By having an Iron Man in this Spider-Man film, you've now given this Spider-Man franchise something none of the other Spider-Man franchises, I should say, have ever had. It makes sense. It's a good move. I think it's a great move for Robert Downey Jr. I think it's a great move for Marvel. I think it's a great move for Sony. And I think it's great for the new Spider-Man franchise. Especially once you see, because I know most of you have not seen Captain America Civil War yet, but once you do and you see the chemistry between Tom Holland and Robert Downey Jr., then you're really going to appreciate, I think, the fact that Robert Downey Jr. will be appearing in the new Spider-Man movie. So there's that. All right, let's go on to one more topic before we get on to the Twitter questions. And this last topic is this. Another thing sticking on the world of the comic book genre and what happened, something major that happened in the world of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We know a little while ago that Inhumans, which was announced to, I believe it was announced to be a 2019 film for Marvel. A little while ago, we heard that it was moved off that date, and now it's official. Inhumans is off the table. Now, no one from Marvel has ever said that we will never do an Inhumans movie, but Kevin Feige confirmed Inhumans is no longer part of their plans. And this is a surprise to, it should be a surprise to nobody. This should be a surprise to nobody. Because remember, when Kevin Feige made the big announcement that there was an Inhumans movie coming, that was a part of the big whole Phase 3 announcement. But remember, at the time, Kevin Feige, the way the organization structure worked at Marvel and Marvel Entertainment was that Kevin Feige was still under Ike Perlmutter. And Ike Perlmutter was the president and running all things Marvel Entertainment. And Ike Perlmutter, who was the head of all things Marvel on movies and all things Marvel in television. But what has happened since then, and of course, the Inhumans are playing a major part in the Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show. A show I still don't understand why anybody watches, but whatever. The Inhumans are a big part of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. television show. So Ike Perlmutter clearly wanted to run an extension from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the TV show, into the movie universe by having an Inhumans movie. Well, then what happened was, a few months ago, most of you will remember this, is that Kevin Feige got his wish and got out from under Ike Perlmutter. So they changed the organization structure under there. And Kevin Feige was moved out from under Perlmutter and became directly answerable to Alan Horn, who's the head of Disney, right? To Alan Horn. And the only person above Alan Horn is, of course, Bob Iger, who is the chairman of all things Disney, the theme parks, the movies, the television shows, the toys, everything. Bob Iger is the high king and lord supreme of all things Disney. And Alan Horn is kind of like his guy that runs all the entertainment stuff. And this organization move took Kevin Feige out from under Ike Perlmutter. He would no longer answer to Ike Perlmutter. And Kevin Feige would run the movies for Marvel and Disney. Well, for Marvel, at any rate. Kevin Feige would run all the Marvel movies. Ike Perlmutter, though, continued to be the head of a bunch of other the entertainment branches, including the television shows. And now you've got these two guys who, from an organizational chart point of view, these two guys, Ike Perlmutter, Kevin Feige, no longer work together. Kevin Feige no longer answers to Ike Perlmutter. One runs the movies, Kevin Feige, one runs the television shows. That's a simplification, an oversimplification of the situation, but you understand what I'm saying. Now you got Kevin Feige running the movies, you got Ike Perlmutter running the television shows, so it should come as no surprise, considering what a big part of the television world now the Inhumans are becoming, that Kevin Feige decided to back away from Inhumans. He doesn't want Ike Perlmutter's Inhumans in his Marvel Cinematic Universe. He doesn't want them. I don't think he ever did. Now, that's neither a good nor a bad thing. I'm just saying I don't think he ever had plans for the Inhumans in his Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially if the Inhumans are still kind of under the control of Ike Perlmutter. Because Kevin Feige can be doing, okay, I'll do an Inhumans movie and I'll do it like this, but then Ike Perlmutter does something completely the opposite with the Inhumans on the television universe, and they're supposed to be one big giant shared cinematic universe, and that would screw everything up. So Kevin Feige just said, you know what, forget it. I'm just not going to use the Inhumans. Now, I'm putting those words in his mouth. I'm speculating here that was Kevin Feige's motivation. Let's be clear here. I'm speculating that was his motivation. I'm not saying Kevin Feige said that, but it is pretty obvious. I mean, to me, at least at any rate, maybe you have a different opinion. Maybe you have a different perception of this. But for me personally, it just seems really clear that Kevin Feige didn't want anything to do with Ike Perlmutter. He didn't want to tie his cinematic universe into Ike Perlmutter's television universe by bringing in the Inhumans and then having his hands tied as to what he can do with those Inhumans, because Ike Perlmutter could suddenly do something completely opposite with them on television. So it seems to me like that's what happened there. But again, that's just my opinion. That's just how it seems to play out to me. Maybe you have a different perception of it. All right, guys, we're going to get to the Twitter questions in just a second. And how do you get your Twitter questions to me? It's very simple. You jump on Twitter and you tweet out your question, and just make sure in the tweet you include hashtag TJCP, because that's how I see your tweets. I have a search thing that just send me all the tweets that have hashtag TJCP in it. So if you've got a question for the show, jump on Twitter, tweet out the question, and include the hashtag TJCP, the John Campea Podcast. Send that out and we'll get it. But before we get to your Twitter questions, we're going to take a second here and thank the sponsor of this episode. And sponsoring this episode of the John Campea Podcast are our friends at geekfeed.com, the world's greatest dedicated geek news feed, providing you with juicy, fresh, up-to-the-minute breaking news and shareable content on all things geek. It's the place to get your geek fix. They eat and sleep nothing but geek, scouring the interweb to serve up some seriously tasty geek nuggets. So get ready to cram every orifice with the very latest from the world of comics, games, TV, and movies. Chow down on the funniest vines and memes. Feast your eyes on all the latest trailers and fan art. And remember, once again, visit our sponsors, geekfeed.com, on all social media by visiting them at geekfeed.com. That's at GeekFeedDotcom, and make sure you visit their website as well. And we at the John Campea Podcast would like to thank GeekFeed.com for their continuing support. All right, guys, with that out of the way, let's now get to your Twitter questions. And the first tweet comes in today from whooleyjames, who writes, "Hey, John, the Founder trailer. Your thoughts? Does this McNugget interest you?" So for those of you who know what he's talking about, the first trailer for The Founder has dropped. And that's the new film with Michael Keaton. And it's about how the McDonald's chain got started and all the drama and the intrigue that went into how did McDonald's actually get started, this fast food chain restaurant. I saw this trailer and it was everything I was hoping it would be. I cannot wait to watch this movie. It looks fascinating. And here's what's really got going for it. I think this movie is going to be a big hit Like not like $100 million opening weekend big, but like 50 million opening weekend, 40 million opening weekend. I think the Founder is going to do, because much like The Social Network is something we all relate with because everybody uses Facebook to one degree or another. Even if you're somebody who doesn't use Facebook, you use it sometimes. And, so it's something that connects with us. We relate with it and we go out and watched it. And I think all of us at one point or another have eaten at McDonald's. We all know McDonald's. We can all relate with McDonald's. And I think them telling this story is going to be fantastic. And I totally forgot that Nick Offerman is in this movie. The dude who plays Ron on Parks and Recreation, one of my favorite television characters, Ron. I totally forgot that he was in this movie until I watched the trailer. Love the dynamic in it. I think this is going to be awesome. It brings up something. This is one of the mistakes that I think the Steve Jobs movie made, because like I was saying, the brilliance of The Social Network was that it really focused on Facebook. And so all of us have an attachment to that. We all relate with Facebook. And so a lot of people wanted to go see it. I think the same is going to happen with The Founder, because we all relate to McDonald's. And therein lies, I think, a mistake that Steve Jobs made. I like Jobs, by the way. I thought it was a really good movie. And Michael Fassbender was just insanely good in that movie. But they made the mistake of, they didn't really focus on Apple so much. And I get why, because the stories about Steve Jobs was still in your marketing. You could have put a little bit more focus on Apple. But what focus they did put on Apple was old, ancient stuff. Because not a lot of people out there, the vast minority of people actually use Apple computers. I mean, I do. I mean, I'm using a Mac right now to record this podcast. But not tons of people do. And I thought it was kind of a mistake but what does a lot of people use? Even if they're not Apple users, a lot of people use iPhones. And I always thought it was kind of a mistake that they ended the scope of this movie long before the iPhone. So I always thought that was kind of a mistake, because I think you would have had a lot more people invested in seeing this movie if there was at least a part of the story that focused more on the development and the creation of the iPhone, because so many people out there use iPhones. I don't. That's the funny thing about me. I am a Mac guy with my computers. I'm actually sitting here right now in front of an iMac on my desk and a MacBook on the other desk right beside me. I am a Mac guy when it comes to my computers. But when it comes to my phones, I am not an Apple guy. I am totally an Android guy when it comes to my phones and my tablets. So I'm kind of weird that way, but I just know what I like, and I like to use what I like. I just think that movie could have done better if they had focused a little bit on the iPhone, because there's so many iPhone users out there. But as far as the trailer for The Founder goes, I thought it was wonderful. I can't wait to see this movie. All right, the next question today comes to us from BrianaJtotheA. I hope I'm reading there. BrianaJtotheA writes, John, a new X-Men trailer dropped this morning. What does it do to your expectations for the film? Yeah, look, everybody knows I'm a huge fan of the X-Men franchise. I think Bryan Singer has yet to make an X-Men movie that wasn't just spectacular. X-Men 1, X-Men 2, and X-Men Days of Future Past are the 3 films that he's directed, and I just think he's knocked them all out of the park. Just crushed them. That being said, I will admit, I have not loved the marketing for X-Men Apocalypse. I was so freaking excited when they announced that Apocalypse was going to be the theme of the new thing, because my all-time favorite collection series of stories in the comic book world is the Age of Apocalypse storyline. And so I was really super excited to hear Apocalypse was going to be in it. But I will admit that while I'm a massive fan of the X-Men franchise and a massive fan of Bryan Singer, I have not been thrilled with the trailers up until this point. That kind of changed this morning. I think this was the best X-Men trailer to date. And I got to let you in on a secret. I was actually told a couple of weeks ago by a very, very reliable source. I was told a number of weeks ago about this trailer and what was going to be in it, particularly the Wolverine claws. That it was going to end with the Wolverine Snicket claws coming out at the end. I found that out a long time ago, but I couldn't say anything about it, which hurt. And I thought it played great. I thought the way they worked that into the trailer was wonderful. Still, for me, I'm a huge Jennifer Lawrence fan. I am a huge Jennifer Lawrence. I think that this girl is going to be around for the next 30 years, collecting Oscar nominations and 1 or 2 more Oscars. I think she's great. but I have not really liked her in the X-Men franchise. I love her in everything else she does. Not a big fan, and it does worry me a little bit that, again, this trailer puts so much emphasis on her because I do not think she has been a strong part of this franchise. She is one of the world's best actresses, and I love her in almost everything else that she performs in. But for whatever reason, for me, it has not been a good fit. Jennifer Lawrence in the X-Men franchise, for me, has not been a good fit. And so that worries me a little bit, but overall, I thought this was the strongest trailer they put out yet, the one that came out today. And in the question you're asking, what does it do to my expectations for the film? It makes me more excited. The other trailers have struggled a little bit getting me excited. This one makes me more excited than all the other ones combined. So, I really like the trailer myself. All right, last question of the day, and this comes from allinforfinn. And allinforfinn writes, can you elaborate on Prowse getting too much praise for Vader? And it doesn't matter who's in the suit. James Earl Jones, more important? ? Okay, where this is coming from is a couple of weeks ago on Jedi Council, which, by the way, you should watch my show, Jedi Council. It's on Collider Video every Thursday, so make sure you check that out if you're a Star Wars fan. I made the comment that, look, I'm a Star Wars fanatic. I love Star Wars. That means I love everybody involved with Star Wars. But I said, let's be honest. David Prowse, who is a bodybuilder, this big, huge guy who was in the Darth Vader suit for the original Star Wars films. But of course, he wasn't the voice. The voice was really James Earl Jones. I made the comment that let's be honest. No matter how big of a fan I am of Star Wars, that doesn't mean I'm a blind fanboy. Whoever was in the suit did not make that big of a difference. And I got some great friends of mine who says, yes, it does, John. And I'm sorry, but it doesn't. And it made no difference. Any big guy who can take the most simple and basic of directions from a director could have done what David Prowse did in that. And look, let's also be honest. Vader, look, the real Vader is James Earl Jones. It's that voice that is Vader. And to be honest, and maybe it's because of the costume, I'm not blaming David Prowse for this. I'm just saying he didn't bring anything extra to it. Vader was just kind of very slow moving, lumbering kind of guy. And look, let's be honest too, the lightsaber fight with him and Obi-Wan at the end of the first Star Wars movie is very clunky and kind of laughable. All I'm saying is that you could put another actor in that suit and you wouldn't lose anything. As long as you still had James Earl Jones's voice, you're not really losing anything. And really, to be fair to David Prowse, what more could you do? It's a big, stiff, lumbering costume. And it's not even your voice. So really, what more could you expect? Not much. There wasn't much more he could have done anyway. Okay? It's a big, stiff suit. How much could we expect from him? Not much. But my point was simply that it's not like you couldn't have put another actor in that suit that's the right size, who can take some basic direction, and you wouldn't have missed a beat. That's all that I was trying to say on Jedi Council, is that it being David Prowse really didn't make a difference. And I kind of took a lot of crap from some people about how dare you be so disrespectful to David Prowse. I didn't say anything disrespectful about David Prowse. There's not much more he could have done. It's just a big, stiff suit. How much can you expect the guy to do? My only point was that another actor of that size could have stepped in and done just as good of a job. Because it wasn't that difficult. That's not disrespecting David Prowse. I'm not saying he did a bad job in it. In no way was that disrespectful to David Prowse. I'm just calling it as I see it. And just because I'm a huge Marvel nut and a huge Marvel fanboy does not mean I stick my head in the sand and go, everything about Star Wars is the best thing ever. No, I mean, look, David Prowse. And look, I said the same thing about Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca. Look, was it good for my heart watching The Force Awakens and knowing that in the scenes where Chewbacca is sitting down, that's Peter Mayhew, the original Chewbacca in that costume. Did that do my heart good? Yes, it did. It was nice knowing that. But it's not as if I watched the new actor in the Chewbacca suit in all the action when Chewbacca is standing and running around. It's not like I went, oh, wow, this is just a different Chewbacca. You can just tell it's not Peter Mayhew in that costume. Not at all. That's ridiculous. And that's all I was saying, was that there was only so much you can expect these actors to do in these big lumbering costumes. And yeah, I stand by my comments on David Prowse, that the Darth Vader is James Earl Jones. It's not whoever was in that lumbering costume that really couldn't do much anyway, because it's a big, stiff costume. It's James Earl Jones. And I stand by that. And maybe you have a different opinion, and that's totally cool too if you do. I'm just saying that's my opinion and why I think that way. Anyway, guys, that will do it for me for this installment of the John Campea Podcast. Thank you so much. And listen, guys, if you're not doing it already, do a couple things. Number one, open up iTunes. Even if you don't use iTunes, open up iTunes. Do me this favor. If you enjoy this podcast, find the John Campea Podcast and make sure you rate it and leave a comment. That just helps me out a great deal. It moves us up the charts, and so people can find us when other people are saying that they like it. It helps other people find it. It would really help me out a lot. If you open up to iTunes, find the John Campea Podcast, rate and comment on it. That would be awesome. And while you're at it, why don't you follow me on Twitter? Follow me on Twitter, simply at John Campea. You can also follow me on Facebook at John Campea. And of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel where I put up editorial videos and some reviews. Simply youtube.com/John Campea. That's where you'll find me. Subscribe to my YouTube channel there. And don't forget, guys, we're just a few weeks away now from my new show. I'm still not allowed to announce the title of it, but I got a new weekly movie magazine show coming on the new Comic-Con HQ network. I will give you more details later, but keep your eyes open for that. All right, guys, that'll do it for me for this installment of the John Campea Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me, and until next time, bye-bye.